Okay, everybody, welcome to another impressions video. I'm trying this again because I actually felt like the one I did for Ghost Recon Breakpoint, or the beta for it, I should say, went pretty well. And I was talking to Lando about this on one of the shows. I think this is sort of a better way for me to do video game reviews because I found when I'm talking through them, as I've done before, number one, this is better audio quality because I'm using a better microphone. But also, I just don't think that I was really able to concentrate all that great when I was playing game. I think most of my focus was on the game itself. And so I'm going to try a few more of these and see how they go. I don't know that I'm going to do one of these for every game I play. Some games I think would be better to actually review as I'm experiencing them, but Judgment isn't one of those. Neither was the beta for Breakpoint, obviously. So I'm talking about, it's just called Judgment, I think it's just called Judgment. Yeah, it is, just Judgment, which is the first new game in the Yakuza universe. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it exactly. I've heard it both ways. Since that does not have to do with the main storyline with Kiryu Kazuma and the traditional Yakuza-style games that Sega has produced. Same studio, same publisher. It's still coming from Sega, same developer, which I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce it. You can look it up. And this is their first new game with a new protagonist. And then, of course, Yakuza 7 is going to revamp the series as well because that will be a new protagonist. I would assume that Kiryu will show up, but I don't know that. And, of course, they're switching from a brawler style, or what they call action-adventure, but it's a brawler, really. I mean, this is a beat-em-up. For all intents and purposes, a beat-em-up game. To a RPG-style, turn-based system for combat. Otherwise, it should be the same. So Judgment may be the last game that we get. I don't know. This is one thing I'm not sure about. When they announced that revamp for Yakuza 7, I'm not sure if that means that Judgment sequels, because I'm assuming there will be. This game did pretty well, I think. Positive reviews. I've really enjoyed it. A lot of people have enjoyed this, and I would assume there will be a sequel, so I don't know if the brawler style will now be moved to Judgment and those games for people who want that, or if they're going to make everything RPG style. I really don't know. It's interesting to think about if they're going to revamp everything or if they're going to kind of split things and try something different and maintain the traditional style with this game now, with this new protagonist. So I just finished the game actually right before recording this, and I knew I was going to buy this game even just when it was announced because it looked enough like Yakuza. It had all the same kind of basic setup. It was taking place in the same city, same basic combat mechanics. So I was already predisposed to buy this. The reviews being good only helped, but I was going to buy it probably regardless unless the reviews were really terrible. And so, one of the things that I have talked about with Judgment that I like, I think I've talked about this on the show somewhere. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. In the 5s that I did, is I think one of the biggest benefits in having the same team decide to set this in the same place as the Yakuza games is there is an immediate familiarity to everything when you get dropped in. If you've played even a few of the Yakuza games before, much of the way the gameplay works, the city itself, the navigation, it is the same city. The streets are the same. The taxi locations, I believe, are exactly the same. The only real difference is that certain places that you used to be able to go into, you can't, stores, shops, and certain ones that never existed before or were closed off, you now can go into. But it is the same map. This map has never changed of this city, Kamurocho. It's the same as it's always been. So that is an immediate benefit. The gameplay style is extremely similar, especially to Yakuza 6. And that's something I'll get to when I get into the actual combat. But one of the real benefits, and this is something that easily could go south with some games, but in the Yakuza series it works, that they always have it set in the same city because there's always a progression of time. Things alter just enough. And what it does grant the player, in a way that a lot of other games, they repeat the gameplay but they do it in such a way that it feels like they're simply recycling content. And that's not to say that they're not doing that here. They obviously are. They are using, I would guess, just completely guessing, 80 to 90% of the way that Yakuza has been developed is being here. It's just different skins in a couple of different locations and specific little cutscenes and, small things. But basically it is the same game. But because Kamurocho has always felt like an intimate environment that you've gotten to know over time, it somehow doesn't feel all that repetitive. At least it doesn't in a negative way. And I don't know why that works for this game as opposed to others. Perhaps it's like, let's say Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed has essentially been a cut and paste gameplay up until Origins, where they changed the combat. But before that, you really knew how to play the game, and you could play the game over and over and over and never really have to deviate all that much. There were little things here and there they changed, but largely it became repetition. And for a lot of people, that wore out very quickly. It didn't for me. I enjoyed it. But with the Yakuza series, I think it's because what's funny is I think that the repetition works better for this game somehow on a small scale, whereas in a big open world, maybe it is because the open worlds are so big and different in many games that the gameplay itself, the mechanics of moving the character, combat, all that, those being the same perhaps comes off worse because the world is so varied. I don't know. I really don't know the psychology behind it. I'm spitballing completely here. But for the Yakuza games, it has never, ever felt like you were just getting recycled content. Some of that, I'm sure, also has to do with the storylines, which are simultaneously extremely dramatic soap opera type of storylines, very, very overwrought, very, very histrionic, and people weeping and crying and screaming, contrasted with some of the most ridiculous stuff you will ever find in a mainstream game. And you'll see that, I mean, the gameplay is playing behind as I talk. And at one point you're going to see, and I'm recording this without watching it because I didn't want to get distracted. So I don't know exactly where it's going to pop up, but I absolutely captured a side story, or what side story in this game is basically side mission, same thing, that had to do with an elderly, and I talked about this on one of our shows. There's a little repetition here if you've heard that show, sorry. There's an elderly gentleman who is running around with a giant fig leaf over his massive crotch area because he is unusually well endowed, and so that has, I believe the story goes that it scared women off, so he's still a virgin at 70 or whatever he is. And this is the basis for an entire side story that is where you actually fight him as the nude guy wearing a mask with a fig leaf. It's bonkers. You will see it at some point. I'll have it in the background. But you contrast that with an extremely serious story about the main character, who is a lawyer, or he's an ex-lawyer, who defended a person who was accused of murder, got him off, which is rare in the Japanese legal system, and got him acquitted, to then have the guy turn around and murder his girlfriend and then burn the apartment building with her in it, which drove him to stop being a lawyer. Now he works as a PI. And that story is handled very seriously and straightforwardly and heavy throughout the whole game. So it doesn't try to make light of that, and yet you contrast that with this story of this guy running around hiding his genitals because they're simply too large to be believed. And somehow, the whole time that Yakuza has existed, it has made these storylines sit side by side and never seem like they should be in two different games. I don't know how they do it. I can't give you an explanation of it, but Judgment does it just as well. And that's what I mean about the familiarity. The contrast of ridiculous and very serious works very well in this same story without just having another Kiryu Kazuma character. They have managed to create a new character who feels independent and different, who is not tied to the Yakuza directly, although he does have some ties because there's just no way you're ever going to have any of these games without some Yakuza presence of some kind. But this does not feel like just a shade of the Kiryu character. They have made, they always call him Takagami? I don't remember what his actual name is because everybody calls him by the three letters, T-A-K. They have made him feel really different and unique, and his storyline is compelling. He's an interesting character. His interactions with people are interesting. I mean, he is, in broad strokes, very similar. So, I mean, I'm not going to pretend that he's a completely original character in this universe. He is somebody who kind of skirts the law a bit, although he was never in the Yakuza, so that does make him different. But, you know, he's got his own rugged sense of honor and nobleness that exhibits itself in different ways. But he is very different. I mean, he does feel like a new character in a city, and it's interesting, and that is part of the familiarity also benefits because you know the city and you know vaguely the players, the major crime families, you know, some of the people who are around the city and the shops and how it's going to work. And we've always known them through the lens of how Kiryu interacts with them. But now we have this new character, Tak, who is interacting with some of these same families and coming from a very different place, because fundamentally, Kiryu was always an ex-Yakuza, and not only that, he was an ex-leader, so there was always a level of respect and kind of deference that a lot of the characters would pay to him simply because he was a known figure in the underworld, whereas Tak is not that. He is an ex-lawyer, so fundamentally, in a lot of ways, opposed in some ways. The Yakuza and the law enforcement work a little differently than we might associate in the United States as far as like the mob and the cops. They're not necessarily outright hating each other. It's a little bit more of a gray area relationship sometimes. But Tak he has at least some relationship with the Yakuza, but there is no loyalty necessarily built in for him the way that Kiryu has. And so some of these interactions are very interesting because since you know all the history of the characters, you know how everybody reacted to Kiryu, it's like, okay, how are they going to react to Tak? Because there is not that automatic authority and fear, because the other thing is Kiryu was a known fighter, a known physical threat, presence. You know, when he walked in, there were people who were like, oh, no, I'm not messing with him. This guy's major league as far as fighting, whereas Tak doesn't have any of that. So it does automatically set up some interesting things where in the other series you could sort of start to anticipate some of the interactions, only going in so many directions because of who Kiryu was. With Tak, he's a new character. And so the interesting part is, how will people react to him? How will he react to people? You know, how his personality will differ. And it's all done very well. The storytelling is great. It does blend in that classic Yakuza style, the ludicrous along with the very serious, in a very effective mix that allows the story to never feel too light or too heavy. There are moments where it comes off, you know, some of the humor can be a little on the juvenile side. Some of the language used is just very crude. It doesn't bother me. It might bother some people. But I don't think it's something that feels out of place in Yakuza. That's always sort of been part of it. And that's because, of course, it's from Japan, and there's a different humor sensibility there. And there's, you know, some of that might be translation. I don't know. Nothing that I would say should really derail anybody from playing it if you've played Yakuza before. But just be aware that humor hasn't really been changed for having a more quote-unquote grounded character. The combat is all the same as the classic Yakuza series. It does suffer from a little bit of what Yakuza 6 also suffered from, which is there's a slight molasses feeling to some of the combat. It's not as fast and fluid as the classic games. That's probably because it's using a different graphics engine. It's upgraded, it's prettier, and so there's a little bit of slowdown to it. It doesn't feel as snappy. Never to a point where I think it actually adversely affects the game. You can always actually manage the combat very well. So I wouldn't say it's unresponsive the way some games can be, but there is definitely a difference in the feeling. And again, that was also present in Yakuza 6. I noticed it in that game. So that's not something necessarily specific to this game. It's just something to be aware of. It does not have, you know, where the remasters have that really snappy feeling. And some of that is, of course, because they're working off old engines that aren't doing as much. I'm pretty sure this is on the revamped engine. I'm pretty sure they redid it for Yakuza 6 or maybe Yakuza 0. But I don't know. 0 didn't seem like that to me. Again, this is a minor complaint. The combat it's still really fun and fast. There's a lot of impact to the hits. The sound design, the whole sound design through the whole game is outstanding. You know, some of the animations, the special moves, there's a variety of different combat moves. They have brought in, again, the idea that you can have these characters that you help that then become active combatants with you. Certain places will have special actions that will trigger because you're nearby them. So the combat is still extremely fun. I barely even mention the sluggishness thing, but it's only notable because in the past games it hasn't been there. So it is, I have to point it out, but I would not say it as something that ruins the game. The graphics themselves, Yakuza is not a top-tier graphical powerhouse. It never has been. That's not the point. It looks good, though. It looks great. There's some really nice lighting effects. Nothing looks terribly bad. Some of the facial animations are quite wonderful. So graphics-wise, there are kind of peaks and valleys to it. But again, you're not coming into this game looking for graphics. This is not going to be Red Dead Redemption 2 level realism. It's just not what the series is going for. That's not its intent. So the graphics, though, are completely fine. They look very nice. They don't look it's not God of War. But it's not trying to be, and that's why I want to, you know, because if you just watch gameplay video, you might sit there and go, well, for a new game, this doesn't look like a new game. Well, it doesn't, but it hardly matters for this. The important stuff is there, which is the humor, the storytelling, the combat. All that stuff is the strength of the series, and that's what's there. Again, the storytelling is very good. There were some really, really fun twists and turns that the story takes. Nothing that I think is too shocking, but all of it makes sense, as much as some of these parts of this game can make sense. I mean, there's a level of unreality to this whole thing that you just go into and accept. Like any kind of just big mob story, there are times where you're like, wait a minute, this really couldn't happen this way, but that's okay. You just roll with it. It's fine. It doesn't matter. The side stories are very good. Some of those are also quite great. Take surprising directions, as has always been a series' strength. Again, familiarity does actually pay off in this game. The side stories in the Yakuza games have always really been, for the most part, very strong. And in many of them, they set up what you would expect to happen in a narrative of this type, and then it kind of changes the last minute, or it simply doesn't work out the way you thought. And that's also very good. It's something where some storylines play out exactly how you know they're going to play out. I mean, it's a 1, 2, 3, no novelty in storytelling type of thing. And then other ones, because those are interspersed there, do surprise you with these really kind of wonderful moments. Not to spoil one too much, but there's one where the mother of a newlywed couple, the mother of the husband comes to you and says, I think the wife is poisoning my son. Can you please check this out? Because I'm really worried for him. He's been sick. And she has kind of a spotty track record. Plus, you're sort of led to believe that it's weird that a woman that is as desirable as she is would settle on this guy. And you investigate it. And honestly, I thought I kind of knew where it was going, and it surprised me. Not in a way that seemed out of nowhere. That's one other thing is Yakuza at times, but very, very loosely, not to a heavy degree. Sometimes there's some left field stuff that happens, but generally it's more like they're just setting you up to identify a trope that you've seen before, and then some of them pay off exactly as you would think, and then some don't. So there's this variety to everything. It's just a wonderful part of the mix of the whole game and where the environment really benefits. And the fact that they're not deviating too much from understanding what made the Yakuza games. Really, half of Yakuza is the story, and half is the combat and the fighting and just the ability to memorize to a degree this small map and the players within it and be able to navigate and kind of chart your own course. And it is an open world game. You're free to do things in any order you want, although certain sub-stories and certain like mini games to some degree, certain things are gated off by progression, but not in a way that feels unnecessary. The game never gets you to a point where you feel like, okay, they're just making me grind to get to this thing. In fact, the game is pretty liberal, as they all have been, with really allowing you to progress pretty quickly to the point where you can. For some people, I think it bothers them when you get too powerful too quickly. I don't think with Yakuza that's really a factor. It does allow you to get very powerful very quickly. I mean, I lost very few fights that were not major boss fights. I never really felt too overwhelmed, although this series does introduce something called mortal wounds, where enemies can actually injure you to a point where a part of your health bar breaks and you can't refill it. My only issue there is that there are a lot of enemies who, as time goes on, can do it, and it becomes a real problem depending on what sequence where you are in certain events. And you can only, as far as I know, heal by one of two methods. And the two methods, which is either a character that can heal you or these special med kits, the same character supplies both. So if you can't get to him, you're in a lot of trouble. I mean, there is no other way that I know of. And maybe I didn't discover it in game. I didn't do a lot of reading about everything. I didn't tease out every secret. That's not really the point of these games for me. So there may be another character who can heal you that way. I didn't find one. The only one that might be able to do I can think of is late in the game you meet a masseuse who can do acupuncture and it creates certain boosts for you. Perhaps she was able to do it and I just missed it. So that is one thing where I understand why they did it. It's a way to stop you from just leveling up so quickly that you become a god level character. And that's fine, except I think they should have provided one or two more ways to at least mitigate that mortal wound structure, even temporarily. There are some new minigames that are introduced. The minigames are sort of one of the side highlights of Yakuza, is all the Sega arcades where you can actually go and play classic Sega games. Those are all back. Like Virtua Fighter is there. What was the other one called? Vicious Serpents? Vicious Vipers maybe? I don't remember the name of it. Darts is back. The batting cages are back and they're great. Those are always fun. There's now a virtual reality center where you go in and you play a virtual game where you put on a headset, and it's really the game. It's still the same game. It's just now there's all these particle effects and everything else, but it's very fun. It's a way to make money. All the little shops that you can go to and drink yourself into a stupor or become friends with the owners, that stuff is all back. So again, the nice part about the team staying with the same team for this new venture in the universe is they're taking all the lessons on what made Yakuza successful, and they're carrying it into this new set of characters, really, and new way of storytelling. Because, again, now we're on the other side of the law here. Kiryu always operated in this weird gray area where it was very known that he was a criminal, and yet he had left enough of it behind that he could operate in plain sight, operate out in the world, and it was okay. He could straddle both worlds, lawful and lawless. Whereas Tak is definitely not part of the underworld. He may interact with them. In fact, he employs one of the ex-Yakuza, but he is not part of that world. So it offers a number of new storytelling opportunities. And there are some new gameplay elements specific to him. For example, as a private investigator, you will tail suspects. That mechanic is very hit or miss. And it's mostly because it can become very tedious. But there are other times where they pace it well enough that when you're tailing a suspect, you have to periodically hide, stay out of sight, observe certain things, take pictures of illicit acts. Most of that is, I would say, 70% of it's handled very well. The 30%, yeah, it's a little weak. That'll get tightened up. That I think they'll fix over time. What else? The inspections where you actually go into a crime scene or you're talking to a person and you have to... there's an interrogation minigame, but it's very simplistic. You can figure it out very easily. There's not much challenge to that. That's okay. I'm not necessarily saying that as a detraction. I'm just saying don't go in there expecting like L.A. Noire type stuff where you have all these different trees you can go down. I mean, you will ultimately be guided towards the correct answer relatively. Then there's ones where you'll actually inspect scenes for clues. You'll put it together. There are scenes that where it will want you to provide information based on things you've reviewed. The only problem for me with that is it didn't appear that there was any way to fail them. It would eventually guide you to the correct answer. And I would hope in the future, as the series grows, as I assume it will, that they will start to introduce some branching where if you botch a interrogation or a reveal scene where you're presenting evidence, that will have some kind of effect. It would make it where there was an enemy that you couldn't necessarily beat as easily or that escapes or something. I think that would be an interesting mechanic to play around with. It's really not present in this game, but there's definitely the potential for it to happen. And again, there's other things that I can imagine that they would bring into this because now, again, we're dealing with a private investigator, somebody who they could do more. There's some puzzles that are introduced that are very interesting and they're fun. Not a lot of them, but they are there. There are chases that, there have been variations of those in Yakuza, though, so I shouldn't really make it like those are new. They seem a little longer than they've typically been, but again, not necessarily a complaint. But there's potential in a character that is a private investigator, because again, even there, somewhat, there's a mirror of Kiryu where Tak is not really part of the law enforcement community, but he is sort of connected to them because he's a private investigator. So there is that middle ground that he occupies, much like Kiryu did with the Yakuza and just the general law enforcement in Kamurocho. So as a first game, it's very good. It doesn't quite get to where Yakuza was for me because it's new and it's different, and I think that's just always going to be kind of what happens when you're shifting gears a little bit, but still, definitely worth buying, definitely worth playing, and I think, just like Yakuza, the main series, that this is a branch that has a lot of potential to get very good. I could easily see this game, or subsequent games, I should say, becoming as much as classic games as some of the Yakuza games have become. And not to say Yakuza has never had weak points. There are dips in, there are games that are lesser in there, but they generally have a level of quality, and so does Judgment. Judgment is definitely among the better games I've played all year, and I really had a good time with it. And really what I want to do is see where they go with it, because I think they have a lot of latitude to play around with. The formula for Yakuza is still working. I'll be interested to see how they handle the combat. Are they going to change this into turn-based as well? Or are they going to stick with the brawler formula? I happen to like the brawler formula. I'm not against the RPG style. I just don't know if I want the whole series going that way. That's kind of why I'm wondering if they're branching these differently. I'm curious what the plan is there. But overall, and you've seen the gameplay in the background, so you've seen a number of different things going on while I've been talking. Overall, this is really, really great stuff if you're a Yakuza fan. It's a really nice new way to freshen some of the material without making it so different that it's not the stuff you loved. It's kind of like, Metal Gear Solid. Each of the entries has done little things differently, and without ruining what made, we'll see now. Konami's got it, and Survive is certainly a low point. But as far as the Kojima-controlled games, there was always enough new without really compromising the, again, very similar in its bonkers storytelling aspects, the way that the series went. And Yakuza's the same thing, and now Judgment. There's enough there. The DNA of Yakuza is there so that you're familiar, and the stuff that worked still works, but we're also getting a new face for the series. We're getting not even for the series. I shouldn't say it. This is separate from Yakuza. Those games are going to continue with their numbering. So this is basically a spin-off, almost like Metal Gear Solid Revengeance, or whatever that was called. This is sort of like that, but I think Revengeance sort of just died after the one game came out. I think Judgment, because it's the same studio, and because they are, to a large degree, reusing quite a bit of what made Yakuza, they will be able to produce more of these games without so much risk involved. So I look forward to it. I had a really fun time with this game. I think it is a great example of how you take something and make a new version of it without really destroying it in the process. So Judgment is, I could, without even hesitation, would recommend it to people who like Yakuza. Obviously, you have to like brawlers. If you don't, you're not going to... This game doesn't reinvent the gameplay. So if you never liked Yakuza games, it is not that big of a change. You're still not going to like this. But if you did, and you want to sample something a little different, in the meantime, before Yakuza 7 comes out, this is absolutely worth playing. It is that good. Really, really fun, very, very good game that makes me want to see more of it. So... Judgment is the name of the game. I didn't realize it was a PlayStation 4 exclusive. That kind of sucks. I wish more people could play this. That's unfortunate. At some point, I imagine it will open up, that it will be available. It is absolutely worth playing. It is a wonderful, wonderful entry in the Yakuza universe, preserving all the stuff that worked and introducing new elements that don't dilute the formula. So if you play it, let me know what you think. Hope you enjoyed the video. Talk to you guys later.